Hey everyone, Mr. Wineland here. We are going to go over real quick Chapter 11, Section 2, especially for those who aren't able to make it into class. We're going to talk about it. We've talked about how the war started, why it started. Now we're talking about America getting into the war. Now remember, the Zimmerman note basically caused a uproar in America because a lot of Americans were upset with Germany for trying to kind of figure out a way to get America incite a war basically with America and Mexico and try to distract us while they try to go and conquer Europe. Well, the United States obviously didn't like that, and so we obviously said nope. We're done with Germany. We're done with you sinking our boats. It was the last straw. Wilson couldn't do anything he can to unfortunately keep us out of war. So we declare war, but the United States is not really prepared for war. We only have 200,000 men. We're kind of short in supply here, so we're kind of in drastic measures right now. Your definition for the Service Act, Selective Service Act. Now, this act is still in play today. When you're at the age of 17, that's when you can start filling it out. Every male at the age of 17 has to fill out the Selective Service Act. And the Selective Service Act started in May 1917 by Congress. Basically, men are to register for the draft, basically. 24 million did, only 3 million were randomly chosen. So not all are needed, not all the 24 men. So they randomly chose 3 million. That's really what they needed to meet the government's need for the fighting power. Most of the inductees had not attended high school, so a lot of these individuals did not have a high school education, and a lot of them wouldn't have a future as an officer in the military following the war. But 1 in 5 foreign-born also went as well. 400,000 African Americans went. Were not selected, though, for the Navy and Marines, but were part of the Army. Soldiers did train for 8 months, often drill 17-hour days with fake weapons because they didn't have the real ones ready or they couldn't afford to give up some of those real ones for practice. So they used like certain sticks and other objects that would simulate a possible bomb of some sort. So women also took part. They couldn't enlist, but they could join as nurses, secretaries, phone operators. Um, So we start to expand our transport of men, food, and equipment to Europe. In addition to the vast army that had to created and trained, the United States had to find a way to transport these men, food, and equipment thousands of miles. So this took an enormous task, especially having to deal with submarine activity over in Europe with the Germans. So the government took a crucial step of getting special status to shipyard workers, ensuring that they could work almost nonstop to kind of build these transports, these ships. So a lot of them were given access to transportation to the shipyards from their homes. They were able to get enough men to work around the clock, basically to work on these things. They had to fabricate certain current ships, so they weren't going to be able to build new ships from scratch. So, excuse me, they had to fabricate, meaning like they had to add steel and metal to these ships in order to get them ready, and then they had to take over commercial and private ships to fabricate as well. German U-boat attacks on merchant ships in the Atlantic were a serious threat to the Allied war efforts. We see American Vice Admiral William S. Sims convinced the British to try the convoy system, which is your definition and your answer number 7, in which a heavy guard destroyers escorted merchant ships across the Atlantic. Did help cut the loss of ships in half in 1917. We see the U.S. also helped, the Navy also helped lay a 230 barrier of mines across the North Sea from Scotland and Norway, designed to bottle up the U-boats that sailed around the Atlantic Ocean. Also, we see that in the early 1918, the Germans ultimately found it difficult to replace some of their lost submarines. So the convoy system obviously worked. Almost 2 million Americans sailed to Europe and only 637 were lost. So, after 2.5 years of fighting, the Allied forces were exhausted, demoralized. They were ready to almost quit. But here come the Americans and kind of brought this freshness, enthusiasm, ready to take down the Germans. And so we see fighting occurred over there with the American Expeditionary Force, the AEF, led by General John J. Pershing, included men from widely separated parts of the country. American infantrymen were nicknamed doughboys, possibly because of the white belts they wore, which they cleaned with pipe clay or dough. Most doughboys had never ventured far from farms or small towns where they lived, and the sophisticated sights and sounds of Paris made a vivid impression. However, the doughboys were also shocked by the unexpected horrors of the battlefield and astonished by the new weapons of modern warfare. We see that the battlefields of World War I saw the first large scale of use of weapons that would become standard in the modern war. And what we mean by modern warfare, because I know a lot of students are like, "But isn't this the modern warfare like going on now?" Yes, modern warfare kind of refers to the now, but also it refers to a new age of war, basically. And that's what we were seeing is that a lot of the things that we are still dealing with now with airplanes, with bombs, with certain rifles, machine guns, all those types of things started in World War One. So this is the beginning of the modern warfare. Tanks ran. We see. Okay, here's the thing I explained a little bit. The horse was vital in early wars, even going back to the age of the Mongols. Um, a lot of individuals realize that the horse has a lot of power. Think about chariots. You know, the power of chariots with the horse dragging it or carrying it, or I guess dragging it. Yeah, dragging it across the battlefield. The speed of that horse is astonishing because it moves so fast and you can quickly get in and out. And the Mongols make it even, or had even have more success just with a single rider, able to quickly go in, attack with their bow and arrow, and get in and get out. Um, we see that this happened even in Europe, even during before World War One, with certain battles with Britain and France and other wars. They would have an army of horses and they would quickly ride in and take down their enemy. But what we're seeing is that obviously with machine guns, it's able to take down the riders a lot easier because before you had a right if you did have a rifle you had to take you'd fire a shot but you'd have to quickly fill your rifle up again before you could shoot. um, but we see that the horse with the machine guns was no match. So tanks were created even before World War One, but they started to be unveiled and released at this time with Caterpillar treads, built with steel with bullets to bounce off. And the British first used tanks during 1960 Battle of Somme, which were but not very effective. But 1917 learned to use tanks to clear path of the infantry through barbed wire defensive. They were pretty early model tanks. They weren't the best. They could break down at times. They're clunky, hard to move around. So it was really difficult. Also, we had early airplanes, mostly used for scouting, but eventually machine guns were attached. Okay, they could carry bombs. Eventually, we see dogfights or dogfighting's created with the two planes duel against each other, shooting each other from the cockpit. They had observation balloons as well, the scout, but those became targets, and ultimately that became a hazard for some of the soldiers. All right, new weapons and tactics of World War One led to horrific injuries and hazards. We do see that the fighting men were surrounded by filth, lice, rats, polluted water was just nasty. Some had to deal with poisonous gas, inhaled it, and some would die or get really sick, and that's where they had to wear the gas masks. Lack of sleep, a lot of times, constant bombardments have made it difficult. Excuse me. Some men was shell shocked and coined the term from World War One, describing complete emotional collapse. We see physical problems included disease called trench foot, caused by standing in cold, wet trenches for long periods of time without changing into dry socks or boots. We see first the toes would turn red or blue, then numb, and then you start to see they would rot and then amputate over time. Um, so some cases the entire foot had to be amputated. A lot of painful infections in the gums and the throat called trench mouth. Red Cross was often used by American volunteers for the wounded in the battlefield. When Russia pulled out of the war in 1917, the Germans shifted their armies from the Eastern Front. When Russia pulled out, then the Germans pushed their armies from the Eastern Front to the Western Front in France. By May, they were within 50 miles of Paris, and the Americans arrived just in time to help stop the German advancement in France. And then several weeks later, U.S. troops played a major role in the throwback of German attacks. And we see that in July and August, they helped win the second Battle of Marne. And the tide was turning against the Central Powers in September, and U.S. soldiers began to mount offenses against the Germans. And we see that your answer number 6 is Meuse-Argonne. And then Alvin York is your definition down here, is what you'd write for him. And then conscientious objector is right here. So during the fighting in Meuse-Argonne area, one American greatest war heroes, Alvin York, became famous. He was a redheaded mountaineer, blacksmith from Tennessee. York sought the exemption of a conscientious objector, basically a person who opposes warfare on moral grounds of pointing out that the Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill." But he eventually went, accepted the fight because it was just. On October 8th, 1918, armed only with a rifle and revolver, York killed 25 Germans. With 6 other doughboys, he captured 132 prisoners. And General Pershing, called him an outstanding soldier of AEF. So for his heroic acts, York was promoted sergeant and became celebrity when he returned to the United States. November 3rd of 1918, Austria-Hungary surrendered to the Allies the same day. At that point, German sailors mutinied, and the government authority and it started to spread quickly. By November 9th, socialist leaders in the capital, Berlin, established a German republic. And we see that the Kaiser gave up the throne. Although there was no Allied soldiers on German territory, the Germans were exhausted and did not want to continue fighting. They were kind of done. There was also around this time we had the influenza outbreak that was causing some problems. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day in the 11th month of 1918, which is just November 11th, 1918, is your answer number 8. Germany agreed to ceasefire, which is Armistice Day, now is called Veterans Day, got changed by Eisenhower. Truce ended the war. And World War I was the bloodiest war in history to date. More than half of 22 million dead are civilians. 20 million more were wounded. 10 million people became refugees. The direct economy cost of the war had been up to $338 billion. The United States lost 48,000 men in battle. Another 60,000 died of disease. 200,000 Americans wounded. For the Allies, it was good news because it brought relief. Many expected return to normal, but that did not really happen for much of Europe, and it was not the end of World War. So, and we'll learn later about that another time. All right, we're done with section 2. Section 3 coming at you soon.